Film has been around for a while. So long, in fact, that some of the earlier films are even in the public domain, which really helps my purposes as I edit this video. While film, at its absolute core, has remained the same, the technology surrounding film has drastically changed since its birth. Technological advancements are constantly changing the way we watch films, and today, we're going to take a look at some of the most important technological advancements in cinema that we think you should be aware of. And keep in mind, not all of them were met with open arms. Some of them have and still do face heavy criticism from filmmakers, film techies, and film goers that have never even used the technology. But we're going to take a look at all of that, up next on Fact Bites. And while technology out-evolves us as we watch this video, take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. Up first is maybe the least contentious of all of our technological advancements, sound and color. And no, I'm not talking about the Alabama Shakes album. Films used to be unintentionally black and white and lacking any audio not added by a theater pianist. Let's start with color. Many people think that one day color film was invented and the industry never looked back, but that is a misconception. Though the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz is commonly thought of as the first color film, this is untrue. Film was being colored long before, as early as 1902, through a handful of tedious processes. Some films used stenciling, which was the act of hand-drawing color onto the film roll, frame by frame, after shooting. There was also dual-color Technicolor, which was a process in which you filmed on two separate strips of film. One filtered red, one filtered green, and then glued them back together, one on top of the other, before projecting it. A few other less notable techniques than the ones we just mentioned ultimately led to the birth of tricolor Technicolor, a much more approachable means of shooting in color. Although Becky Sharp was the first actual film to utilize this new technology, the films that popularized it were Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and The Wizard of Oz. These films really captured the attention of audiences and studios, and played a major part in the colorization of film. However, this transition was slower than expected. The real hard transition was pushed by the commonality of televisions in the early 50s. With black and white televisions infiltrating households, cinema needed an advantage and a clear reason to get people in the theaters. This is the real reason for the quick transition to color. In 1947, only 12% of American films were made in color, but in 1954, that number rose to over 50%. Now, incorporating sound into film was an ongoing effort ever since its birth. The phonograph was invented about 20 years before moving pictures, and the marriage between the two was something that a lot of people were working to accomplish. The biggest hangups were synchronization and amplification. At this point in time, the only way to get sound to play in a theater would be to play it on a separate device, which made synchronization very hard to achieve. It was also a big challenge to get the phonograph to play the audio loud enough so that the entire theater could hear it. Another thing keeping synchronized sound out of films was that theaters didn't even think their audiences wanted to hear actors talk, so they didn't even push very hard for sound in the first place. This changed when Warner Brothers was looking for a way to make their independently produced films more popular. They figured, why not try sound? They brought in the inventors of the Vitaphone, embraced its capabilities, and began producing sound-synchronized films. At first, this still did not include dialogue. They were simply using the device to replace theater pianists. This way, every film could be shown with the same soundtrack, and that soundtrack could include a wider array of instruments. However, they soon produced a film titled Don Juan that included a soundtrack as well as sound effects such as clashing swords that were perfectly timed with the film. The theater ate it up, giving the film a standing ovation. Once the production companies understood how much audiences appreciated this movie, they gradually shifted towards making more sound films. However, this invention wasn't everyone's favorite. As a theater technician or a camera operator, this new invention meant you had to relearn your entire job, and even operate in ways you no longer preferred. For the deaf or hard of hearing, they could no longer understand films as easily as the preceding silent films, which utilized actor-portrayed expression and title cards for any dialogue. Charlie Chaplin, possibly the most famous silent actor of them all, was so resistant to the idea of sound films that he never even participated in one. Nonetheless, sound film was clearly the way of the future and became a staple of what we consider a movie today. Chroma keying, more commonly known as green screening, is the process of removing or keying out a solid color background or prop in order to change it into a different background or scene. It's commonly used in newscasting or video games, but it's a really helpful technology, so you can find it being used in all aspects of film. This technology, like the others mentioned in this video, dates way back. The practice of superimposing two shots together has been used since 1898. However, this process was much more tedious, and thus it was not very commonly attempted. In 1930, the process of blue screening came along. This process was functionally the same as it is today. It combines the image of the actor with an image of a background, substituting the blue background for the image. However, in the 1930s, this process was extremely complicated and was being done physically, utilizing projectors and optical printers in order to superimpose the images on top of the other. In the 1970s, American and British television networks began using green backgrounds instead of blue. This process eventually became much easier, with the introduction of digital film and digital editing. Why green, you ask? Good question. The simple answer is because it's the color that's least likely to coincide with something else in the foreground. And it's very important that the colors of your subject don't match the color that you're trying to key out. Otherwise, this will happen. However, this rule is flexible. If you're shooting a film with green aliens as your subjects, you're gonna want to use a blue screen as your background. Something commonly confused with green screening is CGI, which stands for computer-generated imagery. Now, they're often used in conjunction, but they're vastly different things. CGI is the process of using computer-generated images to either create or add to a video or image. It is commonly used to create 3D characters, scenes, buildings, or even special effects like explosions. CGI dates all the way back to the 1950s, with 2D animations being traced onto film cells by mechanical computers in the intro sequence of Hitchcock's Vertigo. Those 2D implementations graduated to 3D in the 70s, when a short animated film titled A Computer Animated Hand introduced the world of 3D CGI. Ever since then, CGI evolved over the years and was used in a number of influential films, especially in the science fiction genre. Nowadays, the use of CGI is commonplace. While most non-action films will still use CGI to slightly alter a few shots in their films, Transformers: Age of Extinction uses over 90 minutes of sequences containing CGI, and The Life of Pi uses it for 85% of shots containing the tiger. This goes to show that one can really lean on CGI in order to make their films. CGI and green screening have advanced film exponentially. We used to have to make the environments we put our actors in, but now we can put them in otherworldly environments by using computers and animators with keen eyes. Avatar, The Life of Pi, Avengers, all films that would not have been possible without CGI. And green screening? Well, weather reporting would be really bland if not for the color green. Once again though, not everyone loves CGI. Some moviegoers will complain that it makes the movies seem non-realistic or too much like video games. Can't please them all. The next happening to significantly alter the film industry was digitalization. Let's start with cameras. For the majority of Hollywood's life, film stock was a quintessential part of filmmaking. Every camera needed a physical roll of film in order to make a movie, and every set needed specific practices in order to safely and meticulously handle the film reels. Film stock was also a big part of your production budget. It meant that you could only film so many takes of a scene before having to move on to the next, and you definitely don't want to run out of film and have to go back to the studio and ask for more money. Unless, of course, you're Stanley Kubrick, and you don't care about wasting 127 takes of the same scene just to make sure your actress walks up the stairs the right way. Not only has digitalization revolutionized the limited media issue, it's also drastically changed the size of cameras. The cameras that were being used in the very early days of cinema were bulky, to say the least. Here's the camera that was used to shoot The Wizard of Oz. It was 8 feet tall. Now, no one bothered to weigh it, but I'm sure it wasn't light. In contrast, the camera used to film 2019's Best Picture Oscar winner was only 23.5 pounds and was only 15 by 8 inches large. This reduction of size has led cinematographers to be able to shoot an entirely new array of films. 1917's cinematographer Roger Deakins testifies that their film would not have been possible if not for the smaller form digital cameras of today. Nowadays, most movies no longer use film stock to record their actors. They use digital cameras. The very first movie to be shot entirely digital was Julia and Julia, an Italian drama in 1987. Of course, the movie had to be converted to film in order to project it to audiences because digital projectors were not around quite yet. Like our other technology, it took years for digital to be accepted by the major players. Most of the major directors are classical cinema fans. They like what they like. They trusted the look and the tools that they already knew too much to convert to digital. George Lucas shot the middle portion of Star Wars Episode II digitally, and that made the entire movie world explode. He received a ton of criticism for this move, but lo and behold, the portions shot digitally looked just as good as those shot on film. Big names slowly started coming around after this. The percentage of movies using film slowly declined, and the percentage of movies shot digitally slowly increased, until 2012, when the percentage of top 100 US grossing movies shot digitally finally exceeded that of film. Since 2016, over 90% of these movies were shot on digital video. Not only did film use affect the production of a movie, it also affected the post-production process as well. When movies were shot on film, editors had to manually cut and paste scenes together. This was called linear editing. Film reels were actually cut into lengthy strips, sorted by scenes and takes, and then glued together to create the film, the way they wanted it. Nowadays, we use what is called non-linear editing. This just means that, because everything is digital, you can make any edit at any point in the film at any time. You're not constricted to any linear strip of film. The term left on the cutting room floor was actually what happened. Back then, you'd cut something out of the film you didn't want. Nowadays, you simply hit delete. Speaking of delete, another giant advantage of digital is what we refer to as non-destructive editing. Again, with film reels, you literally need to cut and modify physical reels of film, essentially destroying them and making it impossible to use in the future. You better be sure of any edits you're making on film. But with digital, non-destructive editing, you can make all the edits your heart desires without ever altering the original files, making the editing of today much more flexible and simple. But of course, still not everyone has come around to the digital phenomenon. Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino still refuse to shoot digitally, with Tarantino being quoted saying, "As far as I'm concerned, digital projection is the death of cinema," and threatened his own retirement. And there's some merit to this kind of argument. Every technological advancement comes with pros and cons, and the con in this example is the immense amount of money that it costs theaters to switch from conventional projectors to digital projectors. Sure, it means that they'd save money in the long run and their operations would be easier, but those huge upfront costs for digital projectors put a lot of theaters out of business. Good or bad, digital is not only the future, but the present. Digital cameras have revolutionized the world of movies, but also our everyday lives. We even have cameras on our phones, but we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Technological advancements in the way we make movies isn't the only thing changing the game. Arguably, the most monumental thing to happen to movies in the last decade is in the way we distribute them, and that is streaming. In 2007, Netflix, formerly a service dedicated to mailing its subscribers DVDs to watch, started offering on-demand movies to stream for a monthly subscription fee. Its effect on the industry wasn't as detrimental as some predicted. Box office sales were only down 12% from 2007 to 2019. But its effect on the mindset of movie consumers and its long-term implications are still enough to terrify those in Hollywood, not to mention the new uphill battle that COVID has started for movie theaters. On October 5th, 2020, Regal Cinemas permanently shut down all 536 of its theaters. Meanwhile, Netflix's user base continued to grow all throughout 2020. In other bad news for theaters, according to a survey published by Variety, 70% of people would rather watch movies at home than at a theater, even after the pandemic is over and the population can resume activities. The theater industry is facing a very real crisis, and it remains to be seen whether the big studios will try and save them, or if they'll jump ship and accept streaming as their main means of distribution. Warner Brothers recently shocked the industry, announcing that all of their 2021 films would release in theaters and simultaneously on their streaming platform, HBO Max. This was a very proactive, highly controversial move by Warner Brothers, but it is also only a one-year plan, so we'll all have to anxiously wait to find out if this is something that's here to stay or just a failed experiment. Speaking of experiments, there are presently quite a few technological advancements right under our noses that could have long-lasting effects on the industry. Let's start with the one film purists hate the most: phones. Every cinematographer who has ever used a camera will gladly explain to you why an actual cinema camera is better than filming with a phone. But for how much longer will that be the case? Smartphone cameras are far off from cinema cameras that Hollywood frequents, but that gap is closing more and more every day. In 2018, Steven Soderbergh shot a full-length feature film entirely on an iPhone 7 Plus. The film enjoyed a theatrical release in the US and received praise for its effectiveness and production value. Obviously, the majority of films being released are still not shot on an iPhone, but the implications are huge. As we spoke of earlier, imagine the scope of cinema if every kid in America grows up with a cinema camera in their pocket at every moment. Just like the digitalization of film, that could democratize the process and change the industry forever. How about drones? What may have started as a meme for high school boys to fly around their neighborhoods has quickly become a staple of modern TV and film. Not only does a drone cut the cost of an aerial shot in half, or sometimes into a fraction, they've also developed their own artistic place in modern media. Take the popular TV show Atlanta, for example. We're constantly treated to buttery smooth tracking shots that elegantly hover over the city, and wouldn't have been possible with the conventional aerial shots from helicopters. While it's possible that drones become a fad that we leave in the past, they've already left a massive footprint on the industry, and I expect them to stay. How about a more ambitious technology? Yeah, horror is scary, but what if you had to experience the movie Saw from within the room? I'm talking about VR, of course. While VR is currently expensive technology that is inaccessible to the average person, we cannot deny its intriguing possibilities. There's a growing demand for interactivity in all mediums, and we currently have the technology to make that a reality. Imagine sitting on your couch, putting on a headset, and suddenly you're fighting hand in hand with Jason Bourne, riding away from Megatron in Bumblebee, or even running from Johnny throughout a wintry maze. We're definitely a few years away from this, but it's not too far-fetched to think that VR films start becoming a reality. There you have it, a few of the most important technological advancements in the history of cinema. The industry has seen a slew of modifications and constant changes. Some have been welcomed by audiences but not studios, some have been welcomed by cinematographers but not producers. Either way, the undeniable truth is that the industry has shifted towards a more accessible place. Whether it's someone trying to watch a movie at will or film a movie at will, those are both more approachable than they were a generation ago, and that's an awesome thing. Catch you next time.